We're back here with Bradley Devlin, the political editor at the American Conservative. Brad, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on.
So you are one of the, I don't want to say privileged, but maybe one of the most unique reporters in the country right now, in that you were at the Trump rally where former President Donald Trump was shot. Can you tell us about that day? What was the crowd like before this horrible thing happened?
Yeah, Mary Margaret, I went there thinking that the angles were going to be the vice presidential pick. I surveyed a whole bunch of people, just, hey, I'm going to say a vice presidential candidate and you cheer if you like them. There was some energy for a lot of the candidates, the names that we've heard, J.D. Vance, etc. I thought the angle was going to be if Biden was going to step down, if we thought that, if Trump supporters think that the election was stolen in 2020, then what's it going to take to win in 2024?
Right.
And then all of a sudden, about 10 minutes in, a little less than 10 minutes into Trump speaking, I thought a firecracker went off. And then I saw a hydraulic line burst. A bunch of water started spraying everywhere from one of the lifts that were around the stage. And then I saw the flash of the muzzles from the snipers on the barn behind President Trump.
Oh, my gosh.
And that's when we all hit the deck.
So tell us, where were you situated in the crowd?
Yeah, so there's a seated area in front of the stage, and then a few rows of folks standing. And then there's the press pit. I was on the far left side of the press pit, right in front of the official AV studio for the event. Taking notes in my journal, Trump's talking about immigration, showing the chart, and all of a sudden he goes down, and we all hit the deck with him.
What was your first thought? What did you think?
My first thought was this is a prank, and then when I saw him go down, we all hit the deck immediately.
Wow.
We stayed in that position for about 30 to 45 seconds. It felt like the longest time ever. Just frozen, terrified of what might have just happened to members of the crowd, to the President of the United States. And then, because everyone in the AV booth behind me had also hit the deck, the mic wasn't turned off. So we heard Trump communicating with the Secret Service.
Wow.
We heard him say, let me get my shoes, let me get my shoes. And then all of a sudden he said, wait. And we all had kind of popped up at that point, and Trump put that defiant fist in the air. That crowd was on knife's edge, Mary Margaret. It could have been a stampede. It could have been panic. Could have been thousands, and I mean thousands. The press pit was probably about 200 feet away from the president, and there were people stacked for another 100 yards, it seemed like, from behind the end of the press box, which is about 25 yards long. They were ready to bolt. And by showing the crowd that he was okay and that they needed to stay calm and stay in the fight, Trump very well saved lives.
Wow. So I haven't heard that perspective before. Because, I've seen a lot of people say, like, wow, we're so impressed that the crowd didn't react badly, that it held it together, but you think it was because of Trump's reaction?
130% because of Trump's reaction.
Wow.
I mean, the crowd went from screams of horror to cheers of jubilee and a chant of USA, despite all of the terrible things that were happening. I mean, of course, Corey's a hero, and the family he leaves behind is doing an amazing job making sure that his memory and his legacy continues on, as well as all those volunteer firefighters in Pennsylvania. And credit to Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, who said wonderful things about him as well. And despite all of the terrible things that were happening, President Trump put a lot of peace into people's hearts. As we were being evacuated and as crime scene tape was going up around the stage, people were hugging, they were helping each other out. One man hurt his leg, and I saw Sean Parnell, find a kind of a rickety-looking wheelchair and push him about a half a mile in grass and in gravel to make sure that he got to his car safely, to make sure that everything was okay. So there were a ton of heroes there on Saturday. Our law enforcement, the president himself, rally attendees who just held everyone together. And as people were walking out, there's about a quarter mile of just knockoff MAGA merch stands. Where, I'd rather vote for a felon than a jack bleep. I don't know what I can say on this program. We're trying to keep it family friendly, but all sorts of crazy shirts, right, and a ton of fun gear. And a few of them had radio stations. Okay. And it was like I traveled back in time. it was like watching people hold their breath, circled around the radio when they heard about JFK's shooting or the moon landing or any significant event in American history where people started to gather around the radio. And so
wow. So it's like out in rural Pennsylvania, people gathered around radios waiting to find out what had happened to Trump.
Yeah, at these Trump merch booths.
Wow.
The ones who were playing music instantly turned it on to the radio, and Dan Bongino show was on. And people were praying as they listened. And once Dan Bongino said that we hear the president is unhurt, even though he's headed to the hospital, and that he will be okay, another round of cheers and jubilee and tears.
Wow, I just got chills just imagining that. That's amazing, because you all were there and you heard the shots and you saw what happened, but did you actually know what was going on, or was there a lot of confusion?
Well, I was stationed next to some Getty photographers who were doing an amazing job covering the moment, you know, putting their own lives at risk to cover those iconic moments of the Trump, I don't even know what to call it, political movement, presidency. It feels like it's a bit of a presidential moment, even though he's not the president right now. And they instantly pulled their cameras down and they started zooming in, and we saw some of the stills and we saw he was bleeding, but he's from his ear, and we weren't sure exactly how that had happened, whether it was an impact wound from hitting the floor when he was tackled by Secret Service, or if it was bullet actually grazing his ear, which is what it seems to be the case now. But his face, you know, it rattled with a scowl, and then that kind of scowl is not fearful. It's, I'm okay, I've realized I'm okay, and I need to put everyone else at ease. And you can see that in the still images that we saw right there on the ground.
And then fight.
Yes.
That's what he said.
Fight, fight, fight. And at that point, the mics had been turned off, but there was no mistaking what that crowd heard. They heard fight.
And how did people react to that? How did you feel when you heard him say that?
I was shocked. We were still being told by security members in the media, in the press pit, to stay covered. I saw the president get up, say fight. Everyone goes wild. You're still not exactly sure what's going on. They take him off the stage and put him into that Escalade. And then we were told to drop down again. So the next 2 minutes we were kind of in cover until we figured out exactly what was going on. And then law enforcement started to come in and very gently usher folks away from the scene of the crime, and everyone was incredibly cooperative. Members of the press were cooperative. Members of the audience were cooperative. Law enforcement was really patient in dealing with what is an incredibly emotional event for anyone, no matter how close you were to the gunshots. I mean, I had members of that crowd. I stayed there and interviewed people for the next 2 hours before getting into my car and pulling away. One of the front row Joes, right, that group of men who sits in the front row at every rally with brick suit man, all those, they've become avatars of the MAGA movement. One of the front row Joes told me, you know, it was like watching something bad happen to your family member. And that's what I think a lot of people don't understand about the MAGA movement writ large, is that it's brought so many people into the fold of politics that felt left behind and felt like they weren't in the fold before. And they really do view Trump as a paternal family figure, and they think that Trump thinks of them in the same way. And I think that Trump demonstrates that by insisting on having those events, intimate, close quarters, as many people as possible, outdoors. And does that put him at risk? Very clearly. We saw that on display Saturday. But it's, for him, I think, and for the people of the movement, it is so worth it because they create a genuine attachment. I mean, this man was 6'3", pushing 250 pounds, and he was almost breaking down into tears thinking about what could have happened to the former president.
And I think we've seen a lot of people feeling like this is the final straw. They're not going to hide their support for President Trump anymore. I was on a walk the other day in the neighborhood I grew up in, and this man was putting out a Trump flag, and my sister and I said to him, we couldn't totally see what it was, so we said, "Is that a Trump flag?" And he said yes, and kind of looked apprehensive at us. And when we said, "Great, good for you," he said, "What else are you going to do?" At this point, he was saying there's no other way to support him, and I want to show my support. Something that I saw President Trump say in a post on Truth Social is that he feels like it was an act of God that he wasn't killed. What do you think about that?
I think it's completely providential. Millimeters from having a very different atmosphere here in Milwaukee. I think you and I can both agree. Just early on day one, it's joyful, it's light, it's exciting, right? It's appreciation for what we do have here in Milwaukee and in the conservative movement right now. And we could be having a very, very different conversation. I think the Lord knows that this country is deeply divided. It has given into many of its baser passions and many of its vices. And in that moment where we could have very easily seen a civil war-like scenario play out, you know, God's loving hand and a gust of wind blew that bullet just enough off course to save the President of the United States. And at the same time, forcing people to have a long look at themselves and say, okay, is this the type of political rhetoric that I want to be spreading right now?
Right.
You mentioned earlier, you know, the atmosphere at the rallies. When I was thinking about the angles to cover, you know, all those VP pick stuff. I mean, the overwhelming sense that you get when you go to a Trump rally, even in 2024, is these people will crawl over broken glass to vote for this man.
Right.
They will do 10 times that now. 10 times that. There is nothing that will stop these people from voting for Donald Trump in November. They are going to do everything that they can to show up in droves to vote for this man because they genuinely do feel that familial connection to him. So
Wow.
it was a fascinating experience that I wish on no one. That's for sure.
Well, Bradley, we're so grateful for your perspective. Thank you so much.
Yes, thanks for having me.